Hello friends, I'm happy to be here. This is Emily from the Children's Literature Training Academy. I'm going to show you, talk about, and then do a read on one of these amazing Auntie Claus series books by Elise Primavera. And I love Elise Primavera, and I love the concept for her book series. The books are big, they're beautiful. This is the deluxe edition of the first Auntie Claus book. It was hard to find. I had it on wait list for quite a long time on Amazon until I finally got it. Oh, and it matches my ring. Huh? Look at that. This is a cat's eye, blue cat's eye, my ring, in case you're wondering. A little gift I bought myself this Christmas. So the Auntie Claus books, there are three of them. It's Auntie Claus and the Key to Christmas, and Auntie Claus Home for the Holidays, which happens to be my favorite. I think this is the last one. And ironically, on some of the Amazon reviews of the Auntie Claus Home for the Holidays, a few people said they didn't like this one the same as the others. I actually like this one better. This is actually my favorite. I don't know why. I think the pictures and the story resonated with me. But the books are quite magical. And let's just do a little, this is the one I'm going to read. Actually, no, I think I'm actually going to read to you my favorite one. So we'll do that in a minute. But let's look at this first one. And just a little bit about the information of where the author got the idea for the book. It was over 15 years ago, while I was living in New York City, walking down Fifth Avenue, that I saw a glamorous woman dressed in a long red velvet gown with white ermine trim. Close by the woman's side was a little girl with a quizzical look on her face. They vanished into a stately old building, and most curious of all, when I glanced up, although it was still months till Christmas, I saw that high above the penthouse glittered in holiday lights. Just another eccentric New Yorker, I thought. Or was she? So her books were inspired by something that she saw, and it's all about the Kringle family. They take place mostly in New York City. They have a mysterious aunt, Auntie Claus, and the little girl does tend to find out the truth, who her auntie is, Auntie Claus being related to Santa Claus. But it has been kind of a secret, and here you see them walking on the street. So this was inspired by, I assume, the author and artist's memory of what she saw in New York City that inspired her idea for this book. And so their auntie seems a little eccentric. She lives in a penthouse. And this adorable little girl, Sophie, she gets lessons from her auntie on tea drinking and whatnot. And the text, by the way, in this book is a little bit longer. Maybe like really, really super shorter stories. So it takes a little more time to get through them. And one thing I love about her books, at least Primavera's books, is sort of the exaggerated art styles. They're kind of whimsical. They're fun. And she brings things up close and center to make them realistic. Let's see, my favorite picture in here might have already passed it. I love this one where they're flying past the Statue of Liberty. So she finds out the truth about who her auntie is, but has to keep it a secret until the next year. And this is the first book, and this deluxe edition actually has some bonuses you get with this download code inside, which is on this last page yonder somewhere here. So, and you get a read by Ellen Bernstein, some stuff for Christmas cards, a recipe for perfectly peppermint cocoa, and more. So this is the first book. And this second one is Auntie Claus and the Key to Christmas. This one is when Sophie's little brother finds out the truth. This maybe is the next year, and he finds out the truth about who his auntie is. And again, we have the same concept, the sort of exaggerated faces, how they're celebrating Christmas, telling stories, talking about, philosophies of life and whatnot. Her brother having a tantrum, and Sophie has to save the day, save her little brother. So I love this one. This is sort of what this makes me think of: the Nutcracker, the land of the sugar plums, or land of the sweets. This is the land of the prunes, or something like that. I love this because I love purple and green. I don't know. There's one thing I don't prefer personally. I can find it in all of her books. She does a long ways, one page where you have to read it the long way. I can see if I can find it here. Yeah. So you have to turn it to read like this, and she does one of these in each of her books. Personally, I find that a little bit of a conundrum, but for a child, I think it would be great. But let's read my favorite, which is Auntie Claus Home for the Holidays. And I love this one because it brings in some of the Nutcracker concept, Sugar Plum Fairy and whatnot. Okay, let's get a look-see-loo. Any of these books would be great gifts for children or for yourself or for family members. I love pinks and blues and greens and soft pastels, and I think this book has more of those colors, which is probably one reason it resonates with me the most. Here's a good example. Okay, it could be this was the first of all of her books that I read also, so it just stuck with me. Sophie Kringle had always dreamed of being the Sugar Plum Fairy in the school play. At least she'd wear the pink tutu and the Nutcracker at Miss Crumpet's school for young ladies and gentlemen. Finally, it was Sophie's year. There was only one hitch. It was the week after Halloween, which meant it was time to go with her great aunt, Auntie Claus, on her annual business trip, and they would not be back until after Christmas. No, s'il vous plaît, Miss Crumpet pointed out dryly. You can't have your cake and eat it too. Sophie had to choose. Auntie Claus has a little bit of an exaggerated accent. Okay, Santa peeking in the door. This is what I mean about the exaggerated, large, front and center art styles. That night, Sophie was summoned to penthouse 25C of the Bing Cherry Hotel. La, the Sugar Plum Fairy. Oh, you'll be marvelous, child, Auntie Claus trilled. Tutus, tiaras, I wouldn't miss it for the world. But what about your business trip, Sophie asked. You can't have your cake and eat it too, you know. Rubbish, Auntie Claus exclaimed. What are they teaching you at the school, child? You can have your cake and eat it too. At Christmas time, that is all the rule. Sophie had never heard the rule before. Auntie Claus stood and took a deep breath. This year, I'm staying home for the holidays. Christmas in New York, the tree at Rockefeller Center, the 57th Street snowflake, the department store windows dressed to the nines. Oh, it will be heaven. But what about your job, Sophie asked. Santa won't be lost without you there at the North Pole. Santa would be lost. Let's get that right. Red will be the new black, darling, Auntie Claus said mysteriously. New York will be the new North Pole. Works fine for me. Later, Sophie had only been asleep a few hours when she awoke with a start to the sound of a great commotion. She snuck down below to see that the elves had come with hundreds of Christmas trees, thousands of ornaments, and tons of tinsel. There were huge crates of games and dolls, bikes and ice skates, fruitcakes and candy canes and chocolates. By morning, jingle bells were jingling, and the Bing Cherry Hotel was more twinkly and cheerful than it ever had been before, and it wasn't even Thanksgiving yet. Strange guests came too and were lavishly entertained. That is Mr. Winter, Auntie Claus said, pointing to an ancient old man. He's a bit frosty, but he'll warm up. The old man blew on his hot chocolate, cooling it with a great cloud of snow. Does he always do that? Sophie whispered to her aunt. Always, Auntie Claus replied. And those three all have the same first name. Christmas, Christmas, and Christmas. Past, present, and future. Isn't it marvelous? Can you always see through them? Sophie asked. Always, Auntie Claus said. A small, thin lady swathed in pink glided by, and Sophie commented, She looks just like the Sugar Plum Fairy. Actually, darling, Auntie Claus replied, she is the Sugar Plum Fairy. Sugar, that was a tongue twister. Sugar Plum Fairy. Sugar Plum Fairy. She is the Sugar Plum Fairy. And I love the Nutcracker, so this is why I love this book so much. And here we have from the Christmas Carol, the three ghosts, so that's kind of symbolic for me as well. One of my favorite books of all time. I love the pinks in this book. It was the chance of a lifetime, and right away Sophie sprang into action. Who better to teach the role of the Sugar Plum Fairy than the real Sugar Plum Fairy? But the fairy was terribly important and terribly busy. You cannot have the Christmas in New York without the Nutcracker, the fairy sniffed, and you cannot have the Nutcracker without moi. I do not have time for the little girls. But Sophie persisted. She visited the fairy every day, hoping to get some pointers, and always brought a special treat. Some cake with that latte, Sophie offered. The Sugar Plum Fairy does not eat the cake. The fairy pushed the cake away. The Sugar Plum Fairy has to be as light as the air to perform at the Lincoln Center. But Auntie Claus says at Christmas time you can have your cake and eat it too. Oui? The fairy brightened because, quite frankly, dancing around in the land of the sweets every night and not being allowed to have any was really getting to her. Oui, Sophie said, and pushed the cake toward her again. That's the rule. The week passed in a whirl of jetés jetés, pliés, and gingerbread lattes. I did take French in college, but I have no idea if I remember my vowels pronunciation. By December, it was on everyone's lips. From Macy's to Saks, from Berghoff to Barney's. Red is the new black. New York is the new North Pole. But as Christmas drew closer, New York became colder and colder. Red is new black. New York is the new North Pole. Everyone now said with chattering teeth. It snowed a lot. And then the snowmen came, for it wouldn't be the North Pole without them. I love the close-up of Auntie Claus's face and the twinkles. Oh, and here we have, again, the one sideways picture we have to read. Hope that's not too dark for you. In fact, it wouldn't be the North Pole without the North Pole, would it? The higher the snow got, the more it collected at the Bing Cherry Hotel. The more it collected on the Bing Cherry Hotel, the more the Bing Cherry Hotel looked just like the North Pole. Sophie peered anxiously out her window. Her one big chance at being the Sugar Plum Fairy was only a week away, and if it kept snowing, the show would be canceled because of the bad weather. I was just looking at her up in the tower here. Not sure if you can see that. And that's not all. The three ghosts started showing up like clockwork every midnight to chat. Remember last Christmas past side? Oh, it was such fun. Yes, a great Christmas present. But this Christmas is going to be better. No, moaned Christmas future. It's going to be terrible, awful. Oh, don't listen to him, Christmas past and Christmas present said. He never has anything good to say. But Sophie wondered if maybe Christmas future was right. Tomorrow was Christmas Eve, Sophie's debut in the Nutcracker at Miss Crumpet's school. But outside, another blizzard had begun. Evergreen trees were growing tall on 56th Street, and the 57th Street snowflake looked more like a giant snowball. So did the Sugar Plum Fairy, who was too fat to fit into her tutu. I'm not sure I love that being in there because of what girls might think of that, but it is kind of funny. I think you look divine, darling, Auntie Claus said tactfully. Nothing a few slimming vertical lines and a bit of duct tape won't fix. New York is not the North Pole, sobbed the fairy. That is right, grumbled Old Man Winter. I want to go home. I'm sick and tired of everyone blaming me for the weather. We wouldn't dream of staying either, Christmas past, present, and future chimed in. You cannot have the cake and eat it too, wailed the fairy. Nonsense, Auntie Claus said with a dismissive wave of her hand and turned to Sophie, who held her own tutu all ready for her performance at Miss Crumpet's. Isn't that right, my pet? But Sophie wasn't so sure. She knew her tutu would fit the Sugar Plum Fairy. But then what would Sophie wear? No, there was only one tutu, and it was going to have to be every Sugar Plum Fairy for herself. Sophie dashed out of the room. Remember, darling, Auntie Claus called after her. I'll be watching. Pretty. This is actually, it looks like a giant snowman mountain. Sophie tried not to think about the fat Sugar Plum Fairy, all the way to Miss Crumpet's school for young ladies and gentlemen. Sophie thought about how gorgeous she would look dancing into the land of the sweets, dressed from head to toe in pink. Auntie Claus would be watching. Snow was blowing furiously, and it was cold. Imagine an ice cube and an ice cream cone and a snowman. Now multiply that by 100, and you will know how cold it was. Sophie shivered inside her North Pole outfit, the only sensible thing to wear now that New York had become the new North Pole. She folded the pink tutu, and held it tightly to her. The wind taunted her every step. It snapped at her coat and snatched at her hat. The wind plucked the tutu right out of Sophie's hands. It blew it away high up into the air. Come back, Sophie shouted. The tutu twisted and turned and spiraled around and around the snow-covered Bing Cherry Hotel until it reached the top of the very tip of it and stayed. And that's where it got caught and stayed, flapping like a pink flag in the dark, snowy night. Sophie thought desperately that she would have to climb up and retrieve the tutu. She raced toward the Bing Cherry Hotel, and she was twirled around by the swirling snow and found herself at the back of the building, searching for a way in. There it is, Sophie shouted. She pulled on the handle of an enormous door and rushed inside. There were elves everywhere and presents, hundreds and thousands of presents, but for once in her life, Sophie wasn't thinking about presents. I'm supposed to be at Miss Crumpet's in 10 minutes. I'm supposed to be the Sugar Plum Fairy, and Auntie Claus is going to be there to see me, Sophie cried. What am I going to do? You could start by climbing up the sleigh, a voice said. Ho, ho, ho. There, high above, was Santa, ready for his journey around the world. Sophie held out her arms, and in an instant, Santa lifted her with ease onto the sleigh next time. Hurry, Sophie said. I have to get to the top of the Bing Cherry Hotel. I have to get my tutu and then go to Miss Crumpet's. I'm going to be the Sugar Plum Fairy, and Auntie Claus is going to watch. Then you mustn't be late, Sophie said with a wink, and called to his reindeer, up, up, away. The sleigh lurched forward and slid out of the hotel. It lifted off the ground, and moments later they were flying through the air. Oh dear. This is a little bit tricky. Sophie looked down, and all she could see was a mountain range of snow-capped concrete. The department store windows were dark. The Rockefeller Center tree was the 57th Street snowflake. They were buried under tons of snow. Great icicles hung gloomily from everything, and a frozen mist hovered over the city like an enormous igloo. The northern lights still blazed, for what would the North Pole be without the aurora borealis? But this was not how Christmas in New York was supposed to be. Sophie leaned out of the sleigh. There was the tutu, frozen stiff and almost within her grasp. As they sailed by, she picked it from the top of the Bing. Excuse me, please, she said to Santa. I've changed my mind. I need to make a special delivery of my own. Ho, 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 Santa laughed merrily. Where to? Lincoln Center, she said softly. Santa guided the reindeer down, 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 right to the entrance, and Sophie ran to the Sugar Plum Fairy's dressing room. Sugar Plum Fairy. The fairy was surprised to see Sophie. Here, Sophie said. She gently placed the tutu in the Sugar Plum Fairy's hands. Ice and snow glistened on the skirt like diamonds, but the fairy hesitated. It wouldn't be Christmas in New York without you, replied Sophie. And we must have the Christmas in New York, the Sugar Plum Fairy said. Merci beaucoup. She thanked Sophie and wiggled into the tutu. It fit her perfectly. I guess you can have the cake and eat it too at Christmas time. The rule is the rule. Au revoir, Sophie called out and ran back to the sleigh. But she did not believe Auntie Claus's rule any longer. Without her pink tutu, how could Sophie be the Sugar Plum Fairy? It just wouldn't be the same. Next stop, Miss Crumpet, Santa said with a twinkle in his eye. Miss Crumpet, Sophie said sadly. This is my favorite. I think of all the pictures. So pretty, the blue, their beautiful faces, the blue and the red. In moments, Sophie was landing at her school. Everyone was there waiting. Yay, the Sugar Plum Fairy is finally here, they shouted. Sophie shook her head no. I gave my tutu away to the real Sugar Plum Fairy. I just can't have my cake and eat it too, not even at Christmas time. Everyone stood silent and glum. Maybe next year, Sophie said sadly. Next year, Auntie Claus wrapped her cape around her great knees for a wintry ride north. Hop on, darlings. Suddenly, Sophie understood. Come with us, she yelled to one and all. Where are we going? They all wanted to know. On a business trip, Sophie laughed. As they flew away, the lights from the aurora borealis faded over the angels which lined the way to the Rockefeller Center tree, which melted and sparkled as bright as ever. The 57th Street snowflake glittered over the 57th Street once more, and the lights from the shop windows shone bright like precious stones. The people came out just to see a beautiful sight. From Macy's to Saks, from Bergdorf to Barney's, one and all caroled Merry Christmas to you. And I also just love Manhattan, especially at Christmas, which is probably why I love this book so much. More than the others. That's my favorite. By the light of the aurora borealis under the North Pole, the real North Pole, Sophie waved the wand with the star attached to it, and her tiara twinkled as she leapt into the air in the pink shoes. Bravo, darling, Auntie Claus shouted delightedly. She turned to her great-nephew, Christopher. About next year, my little love, she said. Have you ever thought about trying out for Tiny Tim? You'd be marvelous, child. Maybe a hint at another book coming. This is Auntie Claus, Home for the Holidays, and you have, of course, Auntie Claus and the Key to Christmas, and the beautiful deluxe edition, if you get it newer, of Auntie Claus by Elise Primavera.